Evening, everyone. My name is Sharon Poley, and I am the Executive Director of the Fine Arts Work Center, and I am so delighted to welcome both our in-person and our virtual audience this evening. Thank you, everyone here in person, for respecting the request that you wear your mask indoors. We appreciate that very much. Before I begin tonight, I am so pleased to welcome several of our trustees in attendance. Thank you so much, Lynn Kortenhouse, for joining us, and others. The Fine Arts Work Center is committed to a dual mission. We are dedicated to encouraging the growth and development of emerging visual artists and writers, and to amplifying the year-round vitality of the historic artist community of Provincetown. To further the first part of our mission, we present a renowned 7-month fellowship in which 10 artists and 10 writers are granted time and space here to build community and focus on new work. Welcome to all of our fellows in attendance tonight. To further the second part of our mission, each year we present a series of free events and exhibitions in Provincetown, all of which are open and accessible to the public. It's particularly meaningful to welcome so many old and new friends this evening for the final event of this year's fellowship season. It is a privilege and an honor to welcome Pulitzer Prize winning writer, past fellow, and Work Center trustee Jhumpa Lahiri this evening. What an extraordinary culmination of an extraordinary year. We are so grateful to all of our supporters who make our work possible. Together, we truly are building a community that shapes contemporary culture. Special thanks to our institutional partners, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod Foundation, Homestead Foundation, Kelley Foundation, the Provincetown Tourism Fund, and the Provincetown Cultural Council. I would also like to highlight our partner East End Books, a beloved local independent bookseller who's here tonight. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff has been a fantastic partner this entire season and does so much to lift up and amplify the literary arts in Provincetown. We're very grateful. So to support the Fine Arts Work Center and our partnership when making your purchase, if you'd like to purchase online, you can just note EF in the memo section. There are so many ways to get involved with the Fine Arts Work Center. Throughout this month, we are raising funds to support the April Fellowship Fund, an effort to raise $20,000 in dedicated funding in support of the fellowship. If you're inspired to give to this effort, you can do so online at www.foc.org. There are also summer program catalogs in the back if you're interested in taking a creative writing or a visual arts workshop with us this summer. Lastly, I really hope that you'll take a moment to visit our gallery to see the work of second-year fellow Austin Ballard on view. It is now my extreme pleasure and honor to invite 2021-2022 fiction fellow Shastri Akella to the stage to introduce and welcome our guest. Shastri's first novel, The Sea Elephants, is forthcoming from Flatiron Books.
Good evening, everybody. So I want to begin my introduction with a confession. Last October, when all of us fellows got here, our writing coordinator, Andrew, wrote to us with the names of some distinguished writers who were former fellows and invited us to share 3 names as potential options for our April visiting writer. My immediate impulse was to put down Jhumpa Lahiri's name 3 times. Whether or not I followed this impulse through, which I thought was entirely reasonable, I will not disclose. To say that Jhumpa Lahiri is a huge influence on the South Asian consciousness, writers and readers alike, is to state not the obvious but the necessary. Her debut collection, Interpreter of Maladies, which won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, was amongst the first books of our generation to introduce nuanced South Asian narratives into the American and global consciousness. The Namesake, made into an award-winning film, inspired my friend who at the time lived in New Jersey to start a book club composed of women from all over South Asia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka, women who found themselves in Ashima, a character who navigated the American landscape in a way that felt familiar to them. In the politically divided landscape that India has now sadly become, my reader friends at home seek refuge in Lahiri's stories. Stories like The Lowland that depicts the turmoil that led to Bengal's Naxal movement. The novel won the DSE Prize for Literature and was a finalist for the Man Booker Prize. There are also stories like When Mr. Pirzada Came to Dine that shows the friendship between the young narrator, who's a second-generation Indian, and the family friend Mr. Pirzada, who's from Bangladesh. In a piece for The New Yorker, Lahiri writes, fiction is an act of willfulness, a deliberate effort to reconceive, to rearrange, to reconstitute, nothing short of reality itself. Being a writer means taking the leap from listening to saying, listen to me. And we do listen, and we find in Lahiri's work rich details that feel lived. Years back, I read Unaccustomed Earth, which won the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, but even now I vividly recall the details in one of the stories. A character lives in an apartment without a fridge and keeps changing the position of the milk carton so it sits in the shade and lasts longer without curdling. Details like this, in all their profound simplicity, illuminate the relationship these characters share with the worlds they inhabit but may never fully be a part of. Recently, Lahiri lived in Rome, where she wrote in and translated to and from Italian. She says in an interview, the Italian writer in me is connected to the English writer, no doubt, but they are two separate rooms in the same house. She's published 2 books of essays and edited the Penguin Book of Italian Short Stories, and she's translated her own work from Italian to English, including the novel Whereabouts, which was published last year, and the short story The Delivery, which appeared in a public space and has a brilliant shift in point of view that's rarely done in short stories. I highly recommend it. Lahiri's work is a portal that brings us back to ourselves, our deepest hesitations and the hopes they birth. Her stories are an invitation to see our place in the world, even as we constantly reconfigure what that place means to us. Please join me in welcoming Jhumpa Lahiri.
Thank you. Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. Well, gosh, I'm so moved. Thank you, Shastri, for your beautiful introduction, and thank you all for coming, and thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Andrew, especially for organizing these beautiful days that my husband and I have spent around the corner on Commercial Street. I would not be standing before you were it not for the Fine Arts Work Center. So thank you to the Work Center for inviting me here almost 25 years ago. This was the space of my very first public reading. So you can imagine how remarkable it is to come back literally pretty much 25 years later to give a reading before this public, after 2 years in which there was very little public interaction for any of us. So this is really very meaningful to me to be here tonight. And I want to thank 2 people in particular for being here. One is my husband, who was not my husband back then, although I hoped he would be. And I want to thank him for standing by me for these many long years, because I love him more than ever. And he was here when I gave that first reading, as was my dear friend, Corinne Clevedence, who was a fellow with me in the remarkable year when all the writers were women. And Corinne was one of them, and is an extraordinary writer, and we became friends and have remained friends all these years. And she has said to me not only personally, but creatively through many books now, and I've tried to do the same for her. So thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to read a little bit for you, and then I think we'll have some time for questions. So just going to get organized here. I thought I would just start off with a citation. Yesterday, my husband and I are staying in the beautiful Vorst house, and such a beautiful, magical atmosphere and home space to inhabit. And I was just reading a little bit before bed, or when I first woke up. I can't remember. Anyway, I've been dipping in and out of the journals of Delacroix for quite a while. And they're really extraordinary if you haven't read them. And the passage I read, I thought I would just share it with you because it speaks very much to what the work center meant for me, and I think means for many of us. And so this is just an excerpt. This is from October 5th, which is kind of fitting because we got here on October 1st, so kind of captures the spirit of the place for me. This is from October 5th, 1854. And he writes, I'm just going to leap into this quote, to hope of remaining undisturbed, to have a little work to do, or a great deal, but above all, to feel secure in one's solitude. Herein lies a form of happiness that often seems to me more desirable than any other. At such times, I can enjoy myself to the full. I have nothing to hurry me, nothing to tempt me outside a circle of study, where, content with little I mean, of what the average person calls enjoyment, but aspiring to the greatest things by inward contemplation or by looking at the masterpieces of all time, I feel neither crushed by the burden of time nor terrified by the swiftness of its passing. I found this so beautiful when I read it, and I thought a lot about what those 7 months meant, because it was a sense of being, we were removed from what the average person calls enjoyment. We were privileged to be contemplating what really mattered. And it was very little, and at the same time it was everything. It was infinite, and it was infinite in its wealth. And that was the effect of the place for me, not only in the book I had to read that year and the friendships I made, but the beauty and the nature that was surrounding us, and that we were also contemplating and studying. So in any case, just to start us off. And now I'll read to you from this novel called Whereabouts, which came out last year, and it has a little to do with solitude, the solitude that Delacroix talks about, but it's not only about solitude, it's also about community and connection. So it's sort of about both things and the tension between solitude and community, which I think is very much what the work center is also about in the end, and what all artists learn to create, that dialogue, that conversation between the solitude that is needed and the community, which is equally important. So this is a book written in sort of very brief episodes, and I'm going to start with the first one and maybe read the second one and then sort of skip around a little bit until I decide to stop reading, and we can move into some questions. So, and this is a novel I wrote in Italian, and it was published in 2018, and then I translated it into English. So this is On the Sidewalk. In the mornings after breakfast, I walk past a small marble plaque propped against the high wall flanking the road. I never knew the man who died, but over the years I've come to know his name, his surname. I know the month and day he was born and the month and day his life ended. This was a man who died 2 days after his birthday, in February. It must have been an accident on his bike or his motorcycle. Or maybe he was walking at night, distracted. Maybe he was hit by a passing car. He was 44 when it happened. I suppose he died in this very spot, on the sidewalk, next to the wall that sprouts neglected plants, which is why the plaque has been arranged at the bottom, at the feet of passers-by. The road is full of curves and snakes uphill. It's a bit dangerous. The sidewalk is vexing, crowded with exposed tree roots. Some sections are nearly impossible to negotiate because of the roots. That's why I, too, tend to walk on the road. There's usually a candle burning in a container of red glass, along with a small bunch of flowers and the statue of a saint. There's no photograph of him. Above the candle, attached to the wall, there's a note from his mother, written by hand, encased in a milky plastic sleeve. It greets those who stop for a moment to ponder the death of her son. I would like to personally thank those who dedicate a few minutes of their time to my son's memory. But if that's not possible, I thank you anyway from the bottom of my heart, it says. I've never seen the mother or any other person in front of the plaque. Thinking of the mother just as much as the son, I keep walking, feeling slightly less alive. This next bit is called On the Street. Now and then on the streets of my neighborhood, I bump into a man I might have been involved with, maybe shared a life with. He always looks happy to see me. He lives with a friend of mine, and they have 2 children. Our relationship never goes beyond a longish chat on the sidewalk, a quick coffee together, perhaps a brief stroll in the same direction. He talks excitedly about his projects. He gesticulates, and at times as we're walking, our synchronized bodies, already quite close, discreetly overlap. Once he accompanied me into a lingerie shop because I had to choose a pair of tights to wear under a new skirt. I just bought the skirt, and I needed the tights for the same evening. Our fingers grazed the textures splayed out on the counter as we sorted through the various colors. The binder of samples was like a book of flimsy, transparent pages. He was totally calm among the bras, the nightgowns, as in a hardware store and not surrounded by intimate apparel. I was torn between the green and the purple. He was the one who convinced me to choose the purple, and the sales lady putting the tights into the bag said, "Your husband's got a great eye." Pleasant encounters like this break up our daily meanderings. We have a chaste, fleeting bond. As a result, it can't advance. It can't take the upper hand. He's a good man. He loves my friend and their children. I'm content with a firm embrace, even though I don't share my life with anyone. 2 kisses on the cheeks, a short walk along a stretch of road. Without saying a word to each other, we know that, if we chose to, we could venture into something reckless, also pointless. This morning he's distracted. He doesn't recognize me until I'm right in front of him. He's crossing a bridge at one end, and I'm arriving from the other. We stop in the middle and look at the wall that flanks the river and the shadows of pedestrians cast on its surface. They look like skittish ghosts advancing in a row, obedient souls passing from one realm to another. The bridge is flat, and yet it's as if the figures, vaporous shapes against the solid wall, are walking uphill, always climbing. They're like inmates who proceed silently toward a dreadful end. It would be great one day to film this procession, he says. You can't always see it. It depends on the position of the sun. But I'm amazed every time. There's something hypnotizing about it. Even when I'm in a hurry, I stop to watch. So do I. He pulls out his cell phone. Should we try? How does it look, I ask. No good. This contraption can't capture them. We continue to watch the mute spectacle, the dark bodies that advance, never stopping. Where are you headed? Work. Me too. Should we have a coffee? I don't have time today. Okay. Ciao. See you soon. We say goodbye, separate. Then we too become two shadows projected onto the wall, a routine spectacle, impossible to capture. So I'm going to skip ahead now and read, well, this is appropriate. This is a brief bit called In Spring, since it's spring, finally spring. In spring I suffer. The season doesn't invigorate me. I find it depleting. The new light disorients. The fulminating nature overwhelms, and the air, dense with pollen, bothers my eyes. To calm my allergies, I take a pill in the morning that makes me sleepy. It knocks me out. I can't focus, and by lunchtime, I'm tired enough to go to bed. Day and at night, I'm freezing. No shoe seems right for this temperamental time of year. Every blow in my life took place in spring, each lasting sting. That's why I'm afflicted by the green of the trees, the first peaches in the market, the light flowing skirts that the women in my neighborhood start to wear. These things only remind me of loss, of betrayal, of disappointment. I dislike waking up and feeling pushed inevitably forward. But today, Saturday, I don't have to leave the house. I can wake up and not have to get up. There's nothing better. So this next bit is called At the Museum. At the museum. Even though it's right next to the train station, in the midst of perpetual crowds, my favorite museum is almost always empty. I like to stop by in the late afternoon after work. I recognize the guards who spend all day on folding chairs, chatting among themselves in front of mosaics, friezes, frescoes, tiled floors. The museum features a number of houses from antiquity. They were excavated, surroundings, removed, relocated to the public. They've reconstructed a few bedrooms with walls painted red or a dark hue of yellow or black or sky blue, rooms in which centuries ago people slept, dreamt, were bored, made love. The most beautiful room, it belonged to an emperor's consort, has a garden painted onto the walls, teeming with trees, flowers, citrus plants, animals. Pomegranates have split open, and birds perch on the branches of the trees. The scene is fixed, faded. The trees with their thin branches seem to bend as if from the soft breeze that courses through the landscape. This semblance of a breeze is what makes the painted nature tremble, rendering everything paradoxically alive. In the middle of this room, there are two soft benches covered in black leather. I sit down to observe the sun. It penetrates the glass roof and filters the light, causing the tonalities of the trees and shrubs in the fresco to change. The shifting light brightens and darkens the room in turns. It's a panorama that makes me think of the sea, of swimming in a clear blue patch underwater. Today, elegant woman about my age walks into the room. She looks like a foreigner. I bet she's in the city by chance, maybe tagging along behind her husband, who's here for work and busy all day. She has a resigned air, and she looks a bit put out. She's obligated to be a tourist. She knows nothing about this room and doesn't seem particularly impressed. Maybe she's thinking, as she sits in this stunning space, about how much she's had to walk today and how tired she is. Maybe she's thinking of her house in some other part of the world. She's already missing that ordinary dwelling. She's seen her share of churches and fountains, and by now she's saturated. She's got a tiny hotel room. It's either too hot or too cold. She sleeps poorly due to jet. She sits down on the comfortable bench. She's sick of setting out each day and studying the map of the city to find the roads she needs to follow. After taking in the four walls of the room, she looks away, lowers her head, looks down. She studies her swollen feet, her shoes, and thinks about all the streets she's walked in the last few days in a vast city alone, disoriented all the while. She's not moved by the beauty of this room. She takes advantage of it to restore her energy. She closes her eyes and stretches out on the bench without paying any attention to me. She lies down on her back, eyes closed. That's how she manages to fully inhabit and possess this room, crossing a certain threshold I've always respected. Okay, so now I'm going to take you to the pool. This is called In the Pool. Twice a week at dinner time, I go to the pool. In that container of clear water, lacking life or current, I see the same people with whom, for whatever reason, I feel a connection. We see each other without ever planning to. They come at the same time, on those same days, to escape life's troubles. Here's the elderly woman who walks with a limp, leaning on a cane. The space is like an amphitheater, and it's hard for her to make it from the locker room to the edge of the pool. She uses the ladder to get in, and always swims with her face above water. Next to her is the guy with the shaved head who dives deep, does laps for over an hour, never stopping. His potent somersaults send him down nearly half a length before he comes up again for air. It's an enormous pool, and the 8 lanes are almost always occupied. 8 different lives share that water at a time, never intersecting. I swim for about 40 minutes, maybe 50 before I get tired. I'm not a strong swimmer. I can't do a flip turn. I never learned how. The idea of being on my back underwater scares me a little. I typically do the crawl with a weak but decent stroke. In the pool, I lose myself. My thoughts merge and flow. Everything, my body, my heart, the universe seems tolerable when I'm protected by water and nothing touches me. All is the effort. Below my body, there's a restless play of dark and light projected onto the bottom of the pool that drifts away like smoke. I'm surrounded by an element that restores me, one in which my mother wouldn't know how to survive. The one who brought me to the pool when I was little. She'd wait for me. She'd watch me from above, seated on the bleachers, always slightly nervous as I learned to float and breathe and kick. Water can cover me without drowning me. My mother and I are different that way. Perhaps a few drops enter my nose or ears, but my body resists. And yet, every time I swim, I feel cleansed as if from within. It's just that in the locker room, when the other women chat among themselves, I'm prey to terrible stories, brutal information shared as they take their showers, take off their swimsuits, shave their legs and armpits and groins in awkward, contorted poses. That's how one day a young mother, responding to a woman who remarked, "I haven't seen you here lately," talked about her son's cancer, a little boy, just 18 months old. Already had 2 operations. She recounted trips to the best hospitals, the hellish treatment, the precarious recovery. A few days later, two women discussed the adult son of a third woman they both knew. He'd had an accident while on vacation with his family. He'd slipped in such a way that now he was paralyzed and risked never walking again. God, what a nightmare, one of the women said, before turning on the hairdryer and grooming herself. Today, a woman in her 80s who swims 4 days a week shares a memory that surprises. She admits that she's afraid of the sea because of a huge wave that once knocked her down and twisted her up when she was a girl. I was about to drown, she says, still stunned. When I was tossed onto the shore, water was pouring out of my nose, my mouth, my ears. My arms were scraped from top to bottom. She'd been swimming with an aunt who, seeing her frightened, had held her hand, but that human anchor had only caused more harm. She'd have been better off nearly drowning on her own. It's hard to imagine her body when it was young. Over the years, it's lost its shape. She's hunched over, covered with moles. She gets dressed, combs her hair, and puts on a few gold rings, including her wedding band. In this humid, rusty place where women congregate naked and wet, where they show each other the scars beside their breasts and on their bellies, the bruises on their thighs, the imperfections on their backs, they all talk about misfortune. They complain about husbands, children, aging parents. They confess things without feeling guilty. As I take in these losses, these tragedies, it occurs to me that the water in the pool isn't so clear after all. It reeks of grief, of heartache. It's contaminated. And after I get out, I'm saturated by a vague sense of dread. All that suffering doesn't leak out like the water that travels into my ear now and then. It burrows into my soul. It wedges itself into every nook of my body. The old woman closes her purse and politely says goodbye. But before leaving, as I'm drying my limbs, she says, I've got a bunch of dresses in my closet. Would look good on you. They're adorable, but I can't wear them anymore. Would you like them so they don't go to waste? And she adds without skipping a beat, it's been decades since I've had a waist. So yeah, I had to work to make that little joke because in Italian, the word for a waist is vita, but vita is also the word for life. So in the Italian version, she says, it's been I no longer have a vita, right? Non ho più una vita, but she's referring to her waist, but the narrator is hearing it as if she's saying, I no longer have a life. So I had to figure out a way to make something happen there. So I landed on weight and waist. So that was the closest I could come. Yeah, okay. And then this is, I think, how are we doing, Andrew, with we're good? Okay, so I'm gonna read one more kind of longish chapter, meaning like this length. They're all very short. And then see how we're doing. And then I might read like one tiny more chapter and then we can, okay. So this chapter is called In the Sun. In the sun. Today there are protests downtown and all the helicopters have been circling the city. And the helicopters have been circling the city all morning. But it's the sun that wakes me up, and it beckons me to my desk where I write wrapped in my robe, and then it draws me down to the piazza where I'm greeted by the contained mayhem of my neighborhood. It's a splendid Saturday, the first warm day. Only a few people are still wearing boots. I see parkas unzipped and the blistered heels of girls in flip-flops who can't stand their punishing leather ballerina flats anymore. Even though it's Saturday, there's still a dash of elegance to how people are dressed. The bold shade of a jacket, a bright scarf, the tight lines of a dress. It feels like a party effortlessly organized at the last minute. The piazza becomes a beach on days like this, and a sense of well-being, of euphoria permeates the air. All the stores are full of people, long lines at the bank machine, the butcher, the bakery, and no one's complaining. It's, if anything, they enjoy the wait. While I'm in line for a sandwich, a woman says, "What a spectacular day," and the man behind her says, "This neighborhood is always spectacular." It's my turn for the sandwich. "Just wait and see how delicious this one's going to be," the man behind the counter says. He's known me forever and makes me the same sandwich at least 3 times a week. Today, it's going to be the best ever. He dips a ladle into a bucket on the counter. He weighs 2 slices of fresh cheese on the scale, arranges them on a roll, wraps the sandwich in paper, and gives me the bill. "Here you go, my dear." It hardly costs anything. I look for a place to sit and find a spot in the playground where they deal drugs at night. But at this time of day, it's bursting with kids, parents, dogs, also a few people on their own like me. But today, I don't feel even slightly alone. I hear the babble of people as they chatter on and on. I'm amazed at our impulse to express ourselves, explain ourselves, tell stories to one another. The simple sandwich I always get amazes me too. As I eat it, as my body bakes in the sun that pours down on my neighborhood, each bite, sacred, reminds me that I'm not forsaken. So, yeah, I can just end maybe with the penultimate sort of episode moment in the book, and then we can have some questions. This is called, in a book that's in which each chapter is a preposition, in case that hasn't become apparent to you. This chapter is called Nowhere. Nowhere, because when all is said and done, the setting doesn't matter. The space, the walls, the light. It makes a difference whether I'm under a clear blue sky or caught in the rain or swimming in the transparent sea in summer. I could be riding a train or traveling by a car or flying in a plane among the clouds that drift and spread on all sides like a mass of jellyfish in the air. I've never stayed still. I've always been moving. That's all I've ever been doing. Always waiting, either to get somewhere or to come back or to escape. I keep packing and unpacking the small suitcase at my feet. I hold my purse in my lap. It's got some money and a book to read. Is there any place we are not moving through? Disoriented, lost, at sea, at odds, astray, adrift, bewildered, confused, uprooted, turned around. I'm related to these related terms. These words are my abode, my only foothold. Thank you.
Let me see if this works. Yeah, it's on now. Anybody? All right.
So, bentornata a Provincetown.
Grazie mille.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I loved your example about vita and waste. And I study Italian, so I know the word order is very different than English. And it was very interesting for me, for example, to read in Italian, and so madrelingua versus your writing in Italian. Because you can sense the sort of English word order there. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Italian word order and the challenges, some of the challenges of writing in Italian.
Well, that would be a really long conversation. And I did write, the first book I wrote in Italian is called In altre parole in Italian, in other words in English, and that's essentially the first book I write about the challenges of writing in Italian. I've written other essays since then, continuing to talk about the challenges of writing in a language I essentially learned 10 years ago. And one of the things that often has to change when translating out of Italian, translating anything out of Italian, is the word order, which is different, and the rhythm of the sentence is often very different. When I write in Italian, I don't use an English word order. I use an Italian word order that sounds right to my Italian ear. And and then when I translate it out of Italian, I have to convert it back into what does sound right. English ear, which are two very different sides of me and my brain at this point. So that's one challenge. There was one, I had to resort, in Whereabouts, I had to resort to, well, I can give you two examples of interesting challenges about this project. One is the title itself. The title of the novel in Italian is Dove mi trovo, which means literally where I find myself, from the verb trovarsi, which is a reflexive verb. And it's a really extraordinary verb in Italian because it refers not only to where one finds oneself in terms of physical coordinates, sort of, I find myself at the Fine Arts Work Center this evening, but also to one's emotional coordinates, if you were. So, mi trovo bene stasera means I am feeling well and I'm happy where I am tonight, right? So it's such an extraordinary verb with poetry built into it, right? The idea of trovarsi is a very rich verb that comes actually from so the word the troubadours, right? The finders, the poets. It's all linked to this verb, trovare, and in this particular case to the reflexive form of trovare, which we don't have in English. So I didn't know what to call my book in English, and I really didn't like the way where I find myself sounded, and nor did I like the more simplistic version of which would be sort of where am I or where I am, depending on whether you decline it as a question or not. So I was very confused about what to do about the title until I thought of Whereabouts as an alternative. And what I liked about that word, or this word, whereabouts, is that like dove mi trovo, it's not translatable into Italian. And so I liked that each word had its own identity that was very stubbornly rooted in its language. And in that sense, I felt that they were interesting bedfellows because they were so extremely separate in terms of their roots and their, sort of their energy. And I liked that the word whereabouts can be a statement and also a question, as can this form of dove mi trovo. So that's one example. And then there's one other example of something having to do, I really didn't want to put a footnote in my book, but I did, because I refer in a chapter to something called a portagioie, which is a jewelry box. It's a word for jewelry box in Italian. but the word, again, the word is a poem, because it literally means a joy carrier, a container of joy is what a portagioie is. And so it's much more beautiful than a jewelry box. And so in the Italian version, the narrator who has Italian says simply portagioie, and she says, come to think of it, the most beautiful word that exists. She says this. And so the Italian reader will understand that right away, because they will look at the composition of the word and understand why she has that thought. But I couldn't do that in. So I actually put in this little note. And I go into the because what I'd say in the English, I can't remember what my little solution was here. Oh, here. So I take off my jacket and start looking for a necklace to perk up my dress. It must be here somewhere in some jewelry box. And then in parentheses, though I prefer joy box for portagioie, which, come to think of it, is the most beautiful of Italian words. And then in the back, there's this little explanation. I sort of go on and on because I love words so much, and their meanings and their etymologies and their explanations. So there's like this whole paragraph, which I won't repeat right now, but so I kind of get into it and talk about it. So these are just two of the many challenges of working between the two.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear your words, and it is incredible to imagine that you were here 25 years ago. And or anything that you're willing to share about your time here as a fellow, or anything about Provincetown 25 years ago.
Sure, yeah. Well, we would face that way, and you would face this way, and it was a little more raw, and Roger was here, Roger Skillings, who was the person who called me and Corinne on the phone to tell us that we were being invited to this place to spend 7 months doing nothing but thinking and dreaming up stories. And he was really the most extraordinary person, and generous and wise, and a wonderful writer, and a deeply good man. And he loved us, and he loved this place with all of his heart. He just lived for this place and believed in it, and handed down, at least to us, a worship of the place, not just the work center, certainly, but also sort of Provincetown and the surroundings. And I remember when I first came to have a look at the place, because I was actually, believe it or not, a little bit undecided about whether I was going to come, because I was crazy. I didn't know, but I had what to do with my life at that particular juncture, and so I came, and he welcomed me. He was waiting for me in the parking lot when I arrived, and he showed me around. He showed me this room. He showed me the barn where I ended up living. He showed me a few other things. He said, that's where you would do your laundry. I'm like, okay. But I remember he said to me, this is my Venice, this is my Paris. And I was really struck by that he had found the whole world and the beauty of the whole world in this, at least geographically speaking, rather small landmass, and so much of it is sand, as we know, and how he had created that sense of place for himself that was so much an act of the imagination and of his love. And in some sense, even a book like Whereabouts grows out of kind of a Roger-like, I think, attitude of thinking about things that don't correspond necessarily to reality. So we had Roger, and we had each other, and we had amazing people who were modeling ways of being an artist, being working artists. That was so important. So we had Judy Sean who would come with baked beans, like in pots, and plant them on the picnic table outside, and kind of ignore us, but in a good way, because they were so amazing, we were just, I was amazed to be just in their company, and there were many. Stanley Kunitz was still alive. He would come to the reading. So I mean, there was just such an incredible community of people who had made the center and built the work center and loved the work center and believed in it and believed in us. And I will be forever grateful for that, that belief that I didn't have in myself. I certainly didn't have it in myself, but they had it. They had it for us, and made all the difference. There were many, just the town was very different as well. I mean, there were like 3 places to eat, and nowhere to get anything resembling a cappuccino or anything like that. So it was kind of a different speed in terms of the way things looked and the kind of purchases one might make. So it was a little more bare bones, but so beautiful and enriching every day.
Anybody else?
I have kind of a follow-up to that question. I was wondering if there's any sort of themes maybe you observed here that in Provincetown that you took into your work. I'm thinking of like tourism, it seems like in what you read, I was struck by that description of the tourist, and also in I think The Boundary, a short story of yours, feels very much like a Cape Cod story, and its concerns with like class and tourism. Also, I think in Namesake, you have a scene in Provincetown. So I'm just wondering how it's kind of the experience kind of has reflected into the work you created after being here.
Thank you so much. Well, Provincetown has been of ongoing inspiration to me, whether it's sort of literally depicted in my work or just because it's just reset me as a human being and has been like the prime mover of my creative energy for 25 years. So but yeah, I think so in various books this setting has appeared. So there is a scene that I set on the breakwater, sort of inspired by for a week, my father came to visit me in October. No, not October. It was like November, kind of still sort of nice. And we walked a lot. We walked every day. And one day we went out all the way to the lighthouse. And he was the one. He was like, "We're going to the lighthouse." So I put into that novel, and what else? A lot of the lowland geography, though it's ostensibly taking place in Rhode Island, where I grew up, it's actually, there's a lot of sort of Cape, Wellfleet, Provincetown specifics built layer, sort of inlaid to that novel as well. And then we were just having lunch. My husband and I were having lunch today with some friends of ours in Wellfleet, and they were the two friends with whom I finally worked up the courage to swim all the way across a pond, which is like a pond the size of this room, but I was afraid of it. And then finally at the end of the summer, with the two of them flanking me, we did it, and we went to the other side. And that crossing became the initial metaphor for the in altre parole, in other words, in which I talk about the desire to completely immerse myself in Italian and take away all of the sort of, training wheels and safety measures. And so because what I had been doing all that summer was circling around Duck Pond, because I was always afraid there was something, I always was worried that what if something happened in the middle, what if I got tired, what if, so that was interesting that Wellfleet, that moment, was the jumping off point for a very different, just a completely different, unexpected turn in my creative life. And I mean, I will just say briefly that the whole journey into Italian, which is now ongoing as an experiment. I don't think I would have done something like that had I not come to the work center, to a place where I felt that I was able to, just that physical act of crossing the bridge and coming all the way up here and sort of turning your back to the world, that attitude that is necessary for the artist, and to really feel that, and I felt that very deeply when I came here. And I remember every time I went back or left the Cape for whatever reason during my fellowship year, there was this sort of discomfort because I wanted to just come back here where I was facing the right way with everything behind me and nothing but space and sky and sea in front of me. And so I don't think I would have made that, extra leap into an entirely new language and learning it well enough to be able to think in it and to write in it and to express myself in it had I not come here. And in a way, when I started writing in Italian, perhaps even now, 10 years later, so many people were sort of like, what are you doing and why are you doing this? And this is so strange and everything. But I thought to myself, well, Provincetown and my time at the work center taught me that you can't listen to these voices because those voices are on the other side of the Sagamore Bridge. And what you need is to remember that you're here in this protected place where people believe in you as an artist and believe in you to take the risks you need to take to say what you need to say.
Have you ever written a play?
A play? I wish I could say yes. I really want to play. I've been thinking about writing a play. I wrote a story recently for a new book that will soon be published in Italian. It's a book of short stories in Italian called, in Italian it's called Racconti Romani, which means Roman stories. I took the title from Alberto Moravia, the great Italian writer of short stories, and he wrote many, many, many racconti romani, and has inspired me deeply as a writer. And there's a story in that collection that I sort of try to write as a play. I mean, it's very based in dialogue, and there's the descriptions, the descriptive parts of it are my attempt to kind of write sort of the scenic treatment of what would be a simple 3-act play, but it's still it's it functions still as a story because it's inside of this new collection. But it's a form that really interests me and attracts me, and I would love to be able to work in it. Hmm. Well, thank you. Mm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm a fiction fellow, and I just wanted to say I'm working on my first collection of short stories, and it's been incredible to have your work just in the ether, I think, for the majority of the time that I've been working on short stories. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about your relationship to your first collection now, when you look back on that and think about the work that went into it, about your process, if you could just say a few things about that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, so when I came to Provincetown, I was 30 years old, and I had just finished my doctoral dissertation in Boston in Renaissance Studies at Boston University. I remember I came still with the dissertation to kind of like format for the library, so there was still some little technical stuff to be done on that. And at the same time, in my long years at Boston University, I had been writing short stories. And I had studied creative writing for 1 year at BU with under the direction of Leslie Epstein and others. Was the director of this very brief master's in creative writing that was offered, and I sort of did that in the middle of my other academic work. So I came to Provincetown. I had this dissertation that still needed sort of, you know, to be stapled and processed and whatever, and I had these stories. I had some stories, and a couple of them had been published in small places, like 3 of them maybe, and I didn't have any representation, and but once in a while, I had met with a couple of agents before I got here, because they were the people who would write to me when if a story came out in a magazine saying, oh, if you ever have a number of stories, I would like to see them. So I had a number of stories. I was like, maybe this person would like to see them. So I remember going to speak to 2 different agents with my little pile of stories, and they both said, no one will read stories. These stories aren't what we think would be a book, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you write a novel and get back to us? And so I came to Provincetown, and I had this pile of stories, and I just put them like on a back shelf, and I was trying to write a novel. I thought, well, okay, I have to, I'll try to write a novel and see what happens with that. So I didn't know what, I didn't know what I was going to do when I got here, but I was trying to get this sort of idea for a novel off the and so what happened when I got here was I did have an agent who would come now and then. Her name was Cindy Klein Roach, and she said, oh, you have some stories, why don't you send them to me? I was like, yeah, okay. And so I sent them to her, and I expected the same answer. And she said, well, you know, it's really hard to sell these short story collections. I was like, yeah, I know what you're going to tell me, so why don't you write a novel and then get back to me? And then she said, but maybe I can try, but don't get your hopes up. And so I said, okay, I won't. But then what happened when I got here, I remember having one month being totally bewildered, and I was just walking around a lot and not producing anything at all. And I was working at this sort of had a white picnic barn on the top floor, sort of in the middle of the space, like unanchored to anything. Very interesting for me to sit at a table that not like wedged up against a wall or something. And at table one day I started writing a story called A Temporary Matter, which I would call my first truly mature piece of writing, and or what I felt was my first real mature story, and something kind of cracked open when I wrote that story inside of me, and so the new collection included that story, and miraculously this agent, Cindy, managed to sell the story to the New Yorker magazine. And Corinne and I were just laughing a few minutes before the reading, because when the story came out, it was right around this time. It was April. It was the tax day issue. It was like a black cover with like a pencil and a pained man being like stabbed by a pencil because it was like an accountant's nightmare thing. And I remember, so the story was, I wrote the story. The story was going to be published in the New Yorker. I was getting these phone calls from the New Yorker to edit the story and everything. And then the story came out, but the magazine never came to Provincetown. Spending a week like wandering around Provincetown and looking and looking and looking, because I didn't believe it had come out. And this was before phones and all of these things. So it didn't come out. That was just all like this weird dream I had in Provincetown. Anyway, so with that story in the magazine, I think that helped. And then the agent was able to sell the collection, and Provincetown was a very fruitful time for me, because I wrote A Temporary Matter here. I wrote based on my father came to visit me that week. He told stories. I made a dinner one night for Karen Yama, who lived in the middle of the barn with her husband Jeff Eugenides, then husband Jeff Eugenides. And I made some dinner, and Jeff and Karen said to my dad, so why did you come to America anyway? And my father told this story, and suddenly I was hearing a story that my father had told many times. I was hearing it as a writer, because I didn't really think of myself as a writer before I got here. And then I wrote The Third and Final Continent, based on that visit of my dad. And I remember asking Corinne questions, because there's a very elderly woman character in that story. And I knew Corinne her grandfather was alive then. And I remember saying, Corinne, what are old people like? Because I mean, I grew up without my relatives nearby. My grandparents lived in Calcutta, and they didn't live to be that old. And she said, well, they sleep a lot. And it was so helpful, though. So I wrote The Continent here. I wrote a story called Sexy. So I wrote some key stories that went into Interpreter of Maladies while I was here. I also drafted sort of very crude versions of the name, like sections of the Namesake while I was here. And I actually conceived and drafted in very inchoate form the Lowland while I was here. But it would, like, all of these things were like kind of were to unspool over time. So really, you know, many books were born in some form or fashion in those 7 months.
Anybody else? I think this might be a good start.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jhumpa, for such a beautiful meditation on the importance of this place that we are all blessed to be in together tonight. And thank you all in the audience for joining us and for supporting the continued work of the Fine Arts Work Center that has such a profound impact on artists and writers and culture. Thank you.